everyone out and bought a diesel. Then suddenly Dieselgate happened. You had the likes of buy hybrid. Then it was buy electric. There's different tax policies and different advice from every different government.
For those that can go electric today, it's definitely advantageous, but there's still a huge amount of people out there who can't really go electric because they can't charge at home. So 40% of us can't charge at home. Yeah, it's always been a bit of a political football, hasn't it?
When we're not interviewing the biggest names in the energy world, we actually have Wolfe Power Club special advisory services. Energy M&A is complex, not because of deal structure, because of what you need to do before and after deal closes with your company or the future company. At Wolfe Power Club, our special advisory services support energy companies, investors, leadership teams through mergers and acquisitions and strategic transactions, and also fundraising. And our speciality is downstream energy sector. Get in touch through the website or through LinkedIn. And remember, Wolfe Power Club special advisory services, because in energy, experience is the edge. Run with the pack. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wolfe Power Club. And we're properly into the year now. We're into February. And I've always said that when we come to energy on this podcast, it's not about theories, it's not about PowerPoints, it's not about arguments. It's actually about where people are investing their hard-earned money. And probably after housing, there's nowhere more prominent of where people invest or make a choice than their choice of car. So today, I'm absolutely delighted that we've got a guest who, for the last 15 years, has been helping individuals, companies, organizations, not just choose one car or choose the second car in the two-car garage question for the weekends. No, he's been helping those people choose nearly 1,600 cars every year to see actually what will work for them. So I'm delighted to welcome the founder and owner of Fleet Evolution, Andrew Leech, to the channel. And they also have Mercia Fleet, which works as a spin-off company from there that works on different solutions for organisations from as small as a couple of cars right up to hundreds of cars. Andrew, can I please welcome, for your insights over the next hour, to the Wolfe Power Club and our 80-odd countries that listen to us, to a wonderful recording ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. Really appreciate the opportunity.
I first wanted to discuss the journey of the car in that 15 years where you've had to make key decisions. Is that certainly in the UK and in the European Union, and I appreciate your fleet is UK based, is that we first of all had the likes of the then Labour government talk about buy diesel. It'll be much better miles, but much better for the economy. Everyone out and bought a diesel. Then suddenly Dieselgate happened, probably around the time that you were putting the investment in at the time of starting the first Fleet Evolution. Everyone's like, don't do diesel, fine VW lots of money. And you had the likes of buy hybrid. Then it was buy electric, because suddenly companies like the likes of Tesla and Jaguar started having sort of cars that really suited the business driver. And now we're in a situation where politicians want us to buy more electric. And I was just wondering, you said in our pre-meeting that 15 years ago, the transition that you were willing to go on was slightly quicker than the market. And could you just tell us, listeners, how essentially you were hit as a business and how you've had to challenge this changing environment where there's different tax policies and different advice from every different government?
Yeah, it's always been a bit of a political football, hasn't it? Just us poor motorists just get bullied from pillar to post by different policies. I remember when we first started, the first electric cars were coming out. So I'd had a go in a Tesla Roadster, which was great fun, and changed my perception about electric cars. And just as an out-and-out petrol head before that, just made me think, actually, these things are really, really good. And then I think the first electric car we had in our household was a Japanese Leaf, which we imported. This was back in the days when electric cars were in their infancy. And I remember it was my wife's car, and I think it did about 70 miles. a tank, if you like, or a battery. So a bit problematic in those days. Very much felt like being a pioneer in that regard, just trying to seek out those who eco-tricity charge points which were working back in that day, charging my car for 3-pin plug and external socket. It was very much being a pioneer. And then coupling with that, we had for government policy, and the government policy at the start was 5% as a benefit in kind behind salary sacrifice. Then moving on from that, it went to mirroring petrol and diesel. So the benefit in kind was going up to 15%, which was really taking away any advantage of going electric. And then kind of just again, I remember being in conversation with the Department of Transport from 2017 to 2019. In 2017, we had the reclassification of the emissions of cars and the change in the testing regime. And then all of a sudden, in 2019, they brought in the 0% benefit in kind, which basically meant we'd wasted a fortune between 2012 and 2019 on the promise from the government they were going to get behind electric cars and promise from manufacturers where everybody was just fighting it tooth and nail. But then literally in 2019, I think we had 300 vehicles in 2019 and we were averaging maybe 15 orders a month. That was it. And then come 2020, the start of 2020, before the world went a bit crazy, we literally went straight up to about 60 orders a month and everything went absolutely crazy. And from then on, there's been no holding us back despite COVID. But yeah, certainly at that point, probably invested £500,000 in a business, which was wasted. And it was very, very traumatic.
Yeah, because I always remember sort of having these discussions with my former CEO at the energy company, and prior to that, being at the G's leasing business, and he said he was in charge of G's leasing business when Dieselgate happened. And he just said overnight he had this huge amount of stock across the country where he had either clients wanting to exit, there suddenly wasn't a sell-on market. It was really sort of traumatic times of stuff that had quite a steady flow. Suddenly overnight the whole world changed. And the bit I was also really interested in, as you said, was that, you know, that change in policy, it kind of brought back the glory days of company cars. Now, I think both of us of a certain vintage, that there was a point in time where company cars weren't really seen as a huge tax item from the government. I remember my first UK job was Shell. I was very excited. I got given an Audi A3, a bit like yourself, always mad about cars. It was like an A3 Sport, had every extra on it, you know, heated seats, everything like that. And it also had this system where you had to sort of every quarter estimate what your private miles were, and you wrote a check. I know there's probably listeners going, what is a check? Well, it used to be in the UK, you wrote a piece of paper to do a payment thing. And essentially it was a real, not just a kudos thing, it was like a real, almost like when you're going for jobs, if you could get a job with a company car, it was massive. And then, as you said, gradually, as we went towards 2020, from those early 2000s, everything about a company car got worse and worse, to the point where it started to become virtually impossible to really have a company car as a benefit unless you're doing sort of huge mileage a year. It was really harming. And I was just interesting today is that, and I know it's not quite as good as its peak, but do you feel that actually that benefit in kind change really has made it unbelievable? Like, I think here, and we'll get Adam on the YouTube version to flash it up, but you look at a Tesla Model 3 versus a petrol engine BMW 320i, and I think a Tesla Model 3, if you're, I've used the example of earning 85,000 because that's a pretty high tax bracket in this country, and probably the type of role that would get a sort of Tesla 3 or BMW. There's probably many roles below that, but I was really interested to see that the Tesla, even with the changes in company car tax, the benefit in kind is approximately 600 quid for a car that's worth £50,000. And yet the BMW, a car worth just over £41,000, the benefit in kind is nearly £6,000, i.e. it's not really worth having it. So do you think that change almost has brought back the glory. And I know it's not quite as good as its peak, but it's pretty amazing what you can get an electric car for as your company vehicle.
No, definitely. And there's a big caveat here. But for those that can go electric today, it's definitely advantageous and bringing people back out of kind of cash allowances, which is where they went to. So a lot of people gave up their car. They opted for cash. The government did try and do something about that in 2017 with some changes called Opera, which I won't bore people with, but just some tax changes to try and take away the advantages. But a lot of people did go for cash. For those of us that can go electric, it's definitely brought a lot of people back into company cars. Now, company cars are still quite well down. So I think back in that era, there were just under 1 million company cars on the road. There's now, I think, about 760,000, that type of figure, which, bearing in mind there's offerings like ours, salary sacrifice, which are classed as company cars, is quite surprising that it's dipped so much. But yes, for people who can go electric, then they're opting back into Teslas. They're opting back into, you mentioned Jaguar. So my first proper electric car was an I-Pace. They're opting back into that type of product. But there's still a huge amount of people out there who can't really go electric because I can't charge at home. So 40% of us can't charge at home. And it's just incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive for those guys to make the shift. And there's still that kind of demographic who are struggling to make the switch.
And I'm just interested at charge at home. It's like, as a society, we all decided that essentially it wasn't going to be individuals that sorted out street lamps or street lighting. You know, we saw that as a collective good for towns and communities. Do you feel that it's time that things like charging and I'm a classic without giving the front door address away. I live in Wandsworth, and in Wandsworth you've got your classic terrace housing. There was a few charge points put into the street lamps. There was 3 of them put into a street that probably has about 90 households and potentially a similar car number. It was fine when the first mover got his first Tesla or first i3, but the reality is it's just not fit for purpose. I've seen some beautiful stuff at trade shows of little points that can come out of the curb or, you know, something like that. Do you feel that there needs to be a collective responsibility from the civil service and from the councils that actually it's probably like we sorted out street lighting and we no longer have coal or lamps and we don't expect people to install their own street lights, that it's probably time that there is actually a mandate for councils to sort this out? Because it just feels to me bonkers that I remember in terms of early adopters, my dad was a very early adopter, so he put him and his electrician on a course at a local college to work out how to install the new electric chargers for houses. And yet we still seem to be going down the route of individual big electricity companies giving incentives to install one to your home. But do you think it's about time that councils had that responsibility, like street lighting?
Well, for those 40% of us that can't charge at home, then councils are the only place that can do it because they're actually at the moment a bottleneck. If you imagine there's solutions out there which you've alluded to, but things like Charge Gully, Trojan Energy, solutions like that, they're really viable solutions, but I think only something like about 30 authorities out of the 300 we have in the UK, or 350, have approved them. And even then, it's not kind of a blanket approval where you follow this boilerplate installation and we'll allow you to do it. It's still case by case. Just because the president's there, they're more likely to agree it. But I feel it does need just some push from above, just to get this as part of the local authority's edict and just get it as part of their key measures that they're going to be measured on, or key metrics they'll be measured on. Because at the moment, it's just, if you look at the marketplace as a whole, if you can't charge outside your house, then first of all, you lose all convenience arguments. And secondly, you've got a huge cost obstacle. I charge at home. It costs me about £5 for 200 miles. If I'm charging at a local charge point, a public charge point, then literally it's going to be the same price and more expensive than petrol or diesel. But you also lose the convenience. And please Nobody should underestimate that convenience factor. The fact you get home, plug it in, wake up the next day, it's ready to go when you are, and ideally nice and toasty. It's one of the key things people like about electric cars, certainly for my wife. The fact that she can go into a preheated car is an absolute no-brainer and a reason she'd never, ever go back.
And so I would like to say directly to cancels rather than to Andrew say, but directly to cancels. You seem quick enough to put up tariffs for single streets in Wandsworth, Hammersmith and Kingston to charge me driving down a route I've been driving for 20 years. But you seem very slow to put up these charge points. So get your act sorted out and everything. But hey, we're the happiest people in energy on this podcast. I love the light in your background. For those of you who can't read the full slogan, it says "Go green" or "Go home." So absolutely fantastic mandate there. I'm just really interested then, looking at 2025, of the sort of 1,600 fleet you had, what were the most successful cars and best-selling vehicles or best selected lease deals that really sort of captured the British motorist? And the reason I find you interesting is journalists have a perspective of what they've driven that year. The man in the pub's always going to defend their decision. No one's ever going to say the car they've bought is bad. But you see the whole mandate, the whole smorgasbord, as Rachel Reeves would say. And therefore, I'm fascinated to know what you see as the cars that were strongest in the last 12 months.
Yes, the biggest growth area for us are I was going to say cheap and cheerful, which is a horrible way of wording it. The more economically advantageous, is that a better way? The more economically advantageous cars. So obviously salary sacrifice is our particular offering. Now, years ago, that used to be, I had an I-Pace, I had an Audi e-tron. In fact, I've still got an Audi e-tron. But those types of cars, which were nice, big, luxurious cars, ticked every button really, and perfect for high rate taxpayers. And those are really popular with people moving from petrols or diesels, like your Teslas and that type of product, into their first electric car, where they typically would have had a brand new lease car every 3-4 years anyway. The interesting movement has been for people who are at the entry level of their occupation, so lower earnings level, who maybe have a 5-10-year-old diesel at the end of the drive, and are now thinking, actually, let's go electric because of fuel savings, because of convenience, because of that cost of living crisis or cost of living pressure. You said earlier, obviously, yes, it's second highest item of expenditure. And they can get into a brand new electric car for about £350 a month, including the charging. So things like the MG4 are really popular. The new Renault product, which has come out, which is qualified for government grant as well, which is on offer, that's really popular. The JQ5, literally, I did this analysis earlier today. I asked my orders manager to have a look at this. The JQ5, since it came out, has been hugely successful. Something else I can't read because my handwriting is so bad. It looks like a Bansko, but it's not a Bansko, is there? So I don't know what that is. BYD Seal. BYD Seal. So for the Chinese product is quite popular. Also, a couple Range Rover plug-in hybrid is very, very popular as well. I think that's kind of for people who can't charge at home or people who are a bit nervous to go pure electric. The fact that's alleged 70 miles pure electric, although we're only testing it at about 40 before it switches over to fossil fuels. That's quite popular. And the Kia EV3 and EV9 are really popular on our scheme as well. Those are most popular of this year. And it's because of, I think, the quality of the products, like the BYD Seal. I drove one of those last week to go to a customer site in Newcastle. I got to Newcastle and back, and we're based in Tamworth, without recharging the car. So the range on that was absolutely phenomenal. But it's also that range at a very, very, or comparatively low cost. That said, the Tesla is still popular. The Tesla is always popular. I'm not personally a fan. It's a bit too clinical for me. I prefer something that feels like a car and I'm more closely connected to when I push the accelerator. But the Tesla's really popular as well. The Tesla is so popular because they've brought out such good support levels. You get a brand new Tesla as a company car, as a personal lease, £400 a month, sales sack, about £400 a month, but including insurance, including your maintenance and tyres. And it's a lot of car for that type of budget. So the Tesla's still very popular as well. Plus, much as I dislike Tesla, dislike, is that the right word? Much as Tesla aren't my personal favourite, just from a driving experience, they're the easiest way to kind of get from A to B from a charging perspective, because the car just does it all for you. There's no kind of learning curve. You just listen to the car, and it just controls your destiny very, very easily.
And it's very interesting. You talked about several brands there that, if we'd done this podcast 15, 20 years ago, I remember it was basically like, if you were senior in a company, you got something sort of German, like a BMW, a Mercedes or an Audi. And if you're more junior, you got a Vauxhall or Ford. And yet it's interesting, all the cars you've mentioned are not from that traditional motoring thing. And we will be at the SMMT later on this year, where we'll look at all the figures and what's going on. But I found it phenomenal being at Farnborough. BYD, which I hadn't heard about until a few years ago, was basically the main car manufacturer there alongside Tesla. That, like, the two of them were really like the two powerhouses competing for sales. And the second bit that I found really you could see the change is that one of my favourite streets in London is Piccadilly South and Berkeley Square. And you can see the change in dealerships. And the Jaguar dealership came BYD, so it's still run by the dealer Guy Salmon, but Jaguar out, BYD in. You've got another electric Chinese car company now in Lotus. I appreciate people saying, yeah, but it started off in Heffel, Alex, and so on. And then you've also got MG on that street. So you can really see that the changes you're seeing on the fleet level have also hit the sort of very famous car street in London as well. But there's still a problem, and we can't get away from it. I mean, you've touched on some of the reasons, Andrew, that still 40% of people have that nervousness because they don't have access to electricity. But there was a big problem in the UK last year. The ZEV mandate, or the zero emissions vehicle mandate, was to hit by the end of 2025 the new sales of 28%. Now, there was solid sales at 21%, but it feels like it's flatlined. And essentially, even with the threat, and I don't know exactly what they're doing now to do that, or whether electric car companies like BYD and Tesla are going to be selling credits, but there was the threat, if they didn't hit the 28%, they'd get a £15,000 fine per vehicle that wasn't, which basically takes out all margin from any product, and probably on the lower end of products actually means the car company is paying the state to do cars. This ramps up the 33% penetration by 2026 to 38% of penetration in 27. And therefore, I was just really fascinated from your point of view, is how do we get anywhere near the ZEV mandate when essentially they've already got the massive benefit in kind incentive, but you still have this objections from nearly the best part of 80% of new car buyers from buying electric cars. What do you think will break down that resilience?
I think we got it very wrong very early on, to be honest. I think one of the first things which we got wrong was we didn't let the product sell itself. We basically said to everybody, you're going to have to move. And we're all Brits. We're a very resilient but slightly cantankerous bunch. And I genuinely think if I hadn't gone electric before that was announced and hadn't started this company, I probably wouldn't have gone electric. I would have probably been one of those people. We did a survey with Aston University, I think, last Christmas before, Christmas 2024. And something like 40% of people that responded to our survey said they literally would never go electric until they can't buy a viable used diesel. They just wouldn't go. They're that anti. And I think it is just I think it is just the government. Of course, the government makes that stance, and then you get the Daily Telegraph and other kind of publications that come on very, very negative against the product. You start to see some very people almost seeking out the bad news stories rather than the good news stories, and it's meant the whole perception. It's an uphill struggle for us to try and encourage people to go electric, but it's starting to happen. We are now seeing, over the last 2 years, we've seen dramatic changes where people are a lot more open to the product. But then, of course, the whole policy is still very, very much hit and miss. It's so we had in the last budget the 3 pence per mile charge from 2028, I think it is, for road charging. As to whether it will happen or not, I don't know. I don't think it's overly well thought through. But to have that literally 2 months after we had a policy where a lot of European-made cars were being subsidised, it's just absolute lunacy. For just, again, there's a lack of vision from the government in how we're going to make this happen. And obviously we've identified one huge area, which is charging for people who can't charge at home. But generally, there's just so many conflicting policies just hitting each other.
And I think that charge at home thing is such a big barrier. So I remember back in 2018, I had the opportunity to take the cash allowance or to have a brand new, pretty much anything I wanted within that bracket of e-tron, top end iPace, Taycan. Yeah. And I remember my journey at the time was a weekly commute from London to Manchester and back. And it was that fear factor. We didn't have charge points at the office. I didn't have charge points at the home. And I remember I'd actually ordered a top-end iPace at the time. And I pulled into Oxford Services and there was that dreaded queue. And then there'd obviously been all the memes going around of Teslas queuing out of service stations. And I'm sure it happened on one day. I'm sure there was like 4 bays down. But I remember that just like overnight, I cancelled my order, took the cash allowance, bought a diesel Jaguar XJ, and I just what's interesting is today, still the same street I live on in Wandsworth, and that was back in 2019. Is still no better off than the free charge points than it was. And I know for myself, there's a great passion to try everything. Like I was an early adopter of LPG. My dad was laughing about it the other day, saying, would I go back? And, there was ups and downsides of it. I wouldn't go back because, but it was nothing to the price. We've just shown that benefit in kind tax is almost 1/10 when you've got 2 virtually identical cars, like 600 quid versus £6,000. And it does feel to me that 40%, if every parking space on my street had an electric point, I think the whole street would go pretty quickly, to be honest, because, it's not like my friends and as people know, we're having a big charity car debate and the thing. I think there'll always be that part of the market, like horse racing, that will love specialist cars and individual cars. And I think, but that market of, school vehicles, commuting vehicles, your bread and butter as a leasing company, it's almost staggering now that we don't have that 21% much higher nationally, because you feel that, like, especially on new cars, it's got to happen. And it'll be interesting to see whether that change in the pence per mile. I mean, it's a clear message, Andrew, from both of us. Let's sort out these city centres and these areas, on the flip side, where actually communities can charge. I had another question though that's related to the same point, that also comes a little bit to the greenness of the car, is that one of the things I'm fascinated by, and you must have seen it over your 15 years, it's not just an electric thing. It's almost that workhorse of a car, how millions of them get produced and then just disappear. So in my lifetime, I'm thinking Vauxhall Cavalier, Ford Mondeo, Vauxhall Insignia, even to this day, Britain's biggest selling car of all time, the Fiesta. You hardly see any about it, and they only stopped producing them a few years ago. And you already see with electric cars once it comes to the end of the lease, a big disposal all at once. So I was on my favourite app in the world, Auto Trader, and I noticed today, I was just interested, obviously the Tesla Free's been out for about 4 years now, that perfect point of where a lot of lease deals have come to an end. And I noticed there was over 2,031 Teslas available. So I was just interested on the environmental side. And there's a great argument by the other YouTuber Shmee150 that a V12 is the most eco-efficient car in the world because no one ever scraps a V12 because they're always in very classic things like a Ferrari or a Rolls Royce, and people cheer it. But on a serious level, what happens to these cars? And when they do come to the end of the lease, obviously normally they're probably company car drivers, so they're probably around that 100,000 mile mark. And I was just interested, what happens to these Suevas cars? Where did the million Mondeos go? And what's going to happen with electric cars for maybe people to keep them longer?
Yeah, well, at the moment, they're all going to secondary markets. And to be honest, the demand is absolutely huge. That's one of the challenges, isn't it? I think when we spoke last week, I said my first car, and I think yours was similar, was a Metro, which was £50 at the back of a local paper back in those days. I've actually just bought my daughter her first car, my eldest daughter, and I've bought her an old Nissan Leaf. I say old, 2018, which was the new model Nissan Leaf, which had a slightly bigger battery. So she can stray so far, maybe 120 miles, but no further, which is reassuring as a dad of a teenage daughter. Reassuring unless, of course, she gets stranded somewhere and needs to take out the world's longest extension lead. But yeah, there's quite a few stock around about there. We've still got intelligence on a 2013 Tesla Model S, which is still kind of at 92%, I think it is, of its battery, and doing really, really well. We know generally, so my e-tron is about 3.5 years old. I've done over 100,000 miles on it. It's lost about 3 miles. It's lost very, very little. So everything we believe and everything we read is indicating that the longevity will be there for electric cars. They don't really suffer from the same kind of wear and tear as a petrol or diesel, which is 100,000 miles. And everything we see when you're on Auto Trader, for example, I think there was something like 400 Nissan Leafs on Auto Trader when I looked within my very, very tight budget, my daughter. I think it was up to 5K, and I also wanted a bigger battery, so something like that. And they're being staffed up really quickly. I think that's one of the important things to allow general public to be able to adapt and embrace electric. Just the ability to have that used stock and to have the same kind of equivalent. In terms of petrol and diesel, it's really odd, isn't it? Because, my first car, similar to yours, I think, was the wrong way round on the registration. I was a D-reg, but at the wrong end of the plate. And then, of course, well, I don't know how long ago it was, but we have a scrappage with the cars over 10 years old, and it was just absolutely immaculate cars, perfect nowadays. Just if a Metro could last 20 years, and how long could some of those new cars, like, the Mondeos and those type of cars last? Have they all been scrapped? Which is just lunacy.
It's the big car. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. You say also the materials. You look at the materials, and there isn't things to rust anymore. I mean, they're all made from plastic and glues, and like even bolts have gone away from it. So it's good.
One of the big concerns, sorry, Alex, from an environmental perspective, is the amount that are being wrote off. So at the moment, there is a big gap with whenever there's any type of accident which is intruding in the battery compartments in any way, shape or form, insurers don't really know how to handle them. So the default is write it off. So that's leading to huge issues from just the impacts on the environment, and also, of course, the impacts on everybody's insurance costs. Insurance costs are going up sky high for all of us. But there is something which we do need a solution. We do need some manufacturers to actually do some research on how can we actually get this product back safely on the road. I'm sure it'll come. If you look at aftermarket, years ago, we were worried about once the vehicle gets to the end of its battery life, it'd have to be scrapped, and that's been proved to be false. There's some great companies out there like Cleverly down Gloucester Way and others that can actually put in refurb batteries now and overcoming that. But the big problem we have at the moment is just the amount of great products which has just been completely scrapped because insurers are writing it off, and nobody has the expertise to put it back on the road. So that's something that hopefully someone with a lot more intelligence and with much deeper pockets than me will overcome shortly, just to get a market for those would-be write-offs.
That is fascinating. That is something that, as a energy podcaster or member of the I just didn't even know about was such a big issue, but makes a lot of sense. I remember also seeing that the same in the commercial vehicle space when diesel went from Euro 5 to Euro 6. Overnight, stuff was just sold out of the UK and Europe over to the likes of Eastern Europe, over to the likes of Asia and so on. But actually, as you say, there's independents that could refit vehicles pretty cheaply, like changing filters, changing slight modifications on the engines and so on to make it Euro 6 compliant. But as you said, it needed a few people, a number of years to work out how to crack it. And by that time, a lot of the stock had already gone. So I think that's a really good question. And we know a few of the guys in the insurance world. So I think we will ask them, because you would have thought it's in their interest as well to find solutions. Now, I'm about to go on to probably one of the biggest pricing debates. Now, a usual presenter at this point would go all out for the consumer and talk about, the challenges of electric pricing. And we know it is a challenge. I'm going to defend a little bit the retailer here, because as someone who used to run petrol stations that put in charge points, the biggest problem you have and why people are like, I can't believe the rate of them, you either got feast or famine. And what I mean by that is that you, across your estate of hundreds of sites with put in charge points, you were really struggling sometimes to get the benefit of the customer using them, and also you really struggled to get the benefit of the customer using the other facilities. So I heard from I'll keep them nameless, but a top forecourt operator who said that they've really had troubles in city centres, and I thought in my mind they'd be some of the best because not charging points, people then use them, but what they're not getting, unlike the fuel customer, is then the follow through of the footfall in the shop, because basically what people do in the city centre, which was interesting, which I hadn't thought about, and so it busted my myth. I presumed they'd be there longer and use it more, but in city centres specifically, you've then got all the competition of all the supermarkets that have got small stores. So people would go to a supermarket that was 2 or 3 minutes, which you probably wouldn't do if you're in and out of the site. And then on top of that, it was good for our industry, and if advertisers looking out there would then listen to podcasts while they're sat in the car. So what they'd have is the vehicle there, the charge time of say 40 minutes, half an hour, but they wouldn't get the same footfall through the shop or the interest. So it was interesting to see like how like human behaviour in city centre sites. But as we look at the pricing, I just did a bit of research before our call, and obviously like housing in terms of charging at home, you probably get deals around the 20p mark, depending what your rate on, even less if you're charging at night. I know some people have told me rates as low as 5 to 7.5p per kilowatt hour if they're on a night rate. But these were some of the charges on the public road that are publicly available in terms of pricing information online. So street lamps and councils in London, where most of this data from, range from 43p to 55p per kilowatt hour. In terms of a retail slow charge was around 30 to 55p, whereas a rapid charge was 60 to 75p. And then on petrol stations, especially those based on motorways, which were near the higher end, was 65 to 85p. So you have a product where the price range is literally almost tenfold, from 7.5p to 85p. As I do defend a retailer, because millions has gone into these sites with like no cash flow in return at some points, and it's catching on now. How because you sit down with companies who want you to look after their fleet, how do their transport managers or the finance director handle this? Because obviously, like, it's huge differences. They're only going to pay their employees HMRC published rates of expenses or equivalent for per mile. How are people coping with this price change? And do you think it also adds into this reason why we're not cracking north of 21% of new car sales?
It definitely does. It definitely does impact this. And again, we come back, and I'll keep coming back to that 40% of us that can't charge at home, like yourself, Alex. You know, it's A, you lose for convenience, and B, you lose for cost saving. So yeah, I'm on 7.5p per kilowatt. So it's £5 for me to get 200 miles charged. It's absolutely perfect. When I go further afield, I do have to pay more, and don't really resent paying that. But it does mean that when you do put in that expensive infrastructure in your town centre or something like that, you're not going to attract somebody like me. And actually, I hate to name shame, but if we look at Instavolt, for example, you know, sometimes 88p per kilowatt, you're paying 30p per mile, the equivalent for that type of technology, which really deters people from making a move. In terms of, sorry, I lost my train of thought. In terms of the charging infrastructure, yes, I think a price cap set by the government might be an example of what we could do, or again, look to discount VAT might be another way of making it more stable. I guess overall, though, it will be down to supply and demand, won't it? So a little bit like town centre petrol stations are cheaper than a motorway petrol station because there's lots and lots of choice for the consumer. And that's part of the challenge at the moment. If you are an electric motorist in most city centres, I come from close to a place called Burton-on-Trent. We have quite a lot of charging infrastructure there. And we've now started to see some of the sites advertise their rates and start to see it going the same way people do with petrol and diesel, actually advertise those rates down. And we've seen rates as cheap as 55p per kilowatt, which for a fast charger is pretty competitive. And I think that's, again, part of this maturing market. I think as we get more and more availability of charge points, people will have to compete more on price. And that's where the cost will come further and further down.
Yeah, I mean, for my 10 pence worth, where I'd be, Andrew, is that not a big fan of price capping. And the reason I'm not a big fan of price capping, as you kind of see a little bit with electricity in households, you end up with getting 5 or 6 deals that everyone merges on. So I won't use the word oligopoly, but let's say, like, it's fair to say when you have a price cap, suppliers sort of go towards the price cap rather than away from it. But one bit I 100% agree on what you said is it probably should be starting to mandate that it's on the pole sign, just as you said, your diesel and your petrol price. I think that would be a huge benefit to the consumer, but I think also actually where the retailer would gain. And look, you know, I make a significant amount of my long-term career has been helping petrol stations, so, but I also think it would help them because the more you advertise it, it comes more normalised, and therefore it comes more the situation of actually they'll be heavily used. And I think that, as you said, if you suddenly had places around the 55p mark and it was quite clear that, and supermarkets started getting involved with big pricing things, you suddenly end up in a situation where kind of everyone wins. The retailer gets the higher turnover, the consumer gets the lower margin per unit. And I think it would really take off. I think the other thing that's very interesting, a company came to me and that said there's huge regulation on what you get fuel wise, but there's just not the same regulation. They'll be on a podcast later on the series about actually what comes out the electric meters, and they've actually done their own testing, and there's significant variance. Whereas in fuel and the weights and measures, you have to be within points of percentages, whereas they talked about some sites that were double digits both ways. So some over giving to you, happy days, and some are under giving to you.
Can I get lists of those, Alex?
Yeah, they'll come most popular sites in the country. We're going to go slightly different direction, and this was slightly inspired. This weekend, I was seeing my sister in North London in Islington, and in front of me is actually a car that must be quite popular because it's one of your prominent deals on your website, and it was a Ford Mustang Mach-E GT, but the difference from some of the ones on your website, it was completely automated. So it had an autonomous driver. It was part of the Uber Wave trial. There is someone in there to grab the controls, but essentially it was driving very nicely around North London, and it's not the easiest of places to drive around North London, completely driverless. I've had a lot of friends and colleagues go over to the States and go in the sort of Waymo taxis, where I think they've used Jaguar I-Pace, but then they've used their own set of cameras and tech, and it's been very, very popular. I understand it's hugely unpopular for insurance companies because they can understand the probability of related incidences with way more data than they can with a human driver. And also I've actually heard arguments that it's actually way more popular with a passenger in that they don't necessarily run into a conflict with a driver of either inappropriate driving, inappropriate political views, in that they can just have their own space. And that's just interesting, as a founder of a lease company, do you have a feeling that driverless cars could open up a part of the sector you don't sell to at the moment? And I was just interested, if you almost took the driving out of cars. I know petrol heads like me that, go motor racing at the weekends and stuff like that, it's not the world we want, but do you think it would actually open up a sector of almost like the private train, like the consumer who could sit with their friends or do their work on their laptop as the car drives itself? And on the more fun side, you could go to any country pub and it'd be able to take you home without drinking. And obviously in 2026, driverless car trials are going throughout the UK. And I was just interested, as a leasing person who's forecasting the future, you're kind of already selling the car, but it's just the tech that would go in it, where you think the driverless car takes your industry.
It's so, as a leasing company, I definitely see a big application for this in a subscription model. So we've seen recently a couple of car clubs which have folded. I think driverless cars, can I see a time as a father that my daughter potentially would just open an app, summon a car, the car arrives and takes her where she needs to go? Absolutely. I'm intrigued by the idea of rural tests on this, which I think are starting later this year. You mentioned going to a rural pub, and that's where I think the technology is going to have real problems here compared to stateside. It's most people can barely drive on roads around here anyway because of potholes, foxes, deers in the countryside. I am very, very rural in the middle of the countryside. Can I see a time when that train you mentioned appears on motorways? So I don't know how it'll be practically, but where you drive under a barrier when you go onto the motorway and your car takes over and just comes in behind another car and follows them down the M1 if I'm going to London or something like that. Can I see that happening in my lifetime? Yes, absolutely. Can I see that happening in a less sterile environment like a country lane or a street outside a school? No. There's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, just the horrific nature of our roads. And secondly, you mentioned insurance companies. Insurance companies work all on stats. They kind of don't care if somebody passes away. Obviously, sooner we didn't, but they don't really care. If you've got a 1% fatality rate on a certain road, it's not really an issue for them. It just means if you're going to drive that road, you'll pay more. But we as people do. And if 100 human motorists, make a stupid mistake, we can kind of accept that. If one computer makes a mistake, then it becomes a big challenge, doesn't it? And you get back to that kind of iRobot moment and debate, which is you're driving down the street, a child bounces their ball in front of you. As a human being, either hit a car or hit a tree or something like that. As a computer, what would you do? It's that difficult situation. So I think there's a lot of moral dilemmas in that. I can see it coming in our lifetime on motorways. I can see in certain town environments, particularly model villages and things like this, I could see driverless cars and as an alternative to taxis. So I can see subscription models where potentially you could have a car club based around driverless cars. But I can't see it coming to the country pub run. As nice as it would be, I just think it's already a scary enough environment on those roads where you've got a human being that we believe will make some more informed decisions without letting the computer make decisions.
No, definitely. I'm both excited by it, but also we'll play for our YouTube watchers here a clip of where another YouTuber, they painted the view of a street on a lorry and then get the car to misread it.
Question was if the Tesla would detect it in time to step on the brakes, and it turned out...
The excitement is to be able to increase productivity on drives that, what I love driving is beautiful mountain trips. What I don't love driving so much is up the M6, but quite often it's because the train will go city to city. But as someone who looks after, in my previous life, petrol stations, right, it's always about 20 or 30 miles away from those train routes. Therefore, you went in a car. If there was a way to then suddenly make me productive so that, come the motorway, I could get the laptop out, that would absolutely be amazing. I think where I agree with you, though, is that the sense of the social contract, will people actually, even if it does happen now, people appreciate that person will face punishment. It'll probably never ever be able to rectify a long-term injury or loss of life, but there is some sort of you've broken it and you will serve your time, and almost like other than financial, there'll be really no way to sort of punish the iRobot, as you said. And I think the other problem I see is that in a very, very serious way, I think that where we have IT challenges now is not so much the technology, but is that those governments, terrorist groups, financial hackers, like we saw JLR close for a month, is that there's people with objectives that sadly hinder technology sometimes, and it's interesting, almost by keeping the human, you almost do some protection of that. But we will watch this space, and what I found fascinating is people I've met that took the taxis in San Francisco and so on, they said the first 2 minutes you got your phone out, you're filming yourself, you're like, OMG, what am I doing? By your second ride, you're enjoying it. You just jump in like normal, you just come select it. So I think there's a bit of everything. I agree, it won't be doing the country pub run. And I was also laughing, thinking in London, that Mustang probably won't hit anyone or do anything like that. But I'm intrigued how it's going to avoid all the penalty fines, like the yellow boxes, the new mandates. And I was like, does Sadiq Khan chase Waymo, or what happens in that situation? Because I could see it racking up massive fines, although being perfectly safe the whole time. Now we're going to an area that's like deeply personal to this podcast. We are fascinated where green careers come from, and obviously you've made an investment. You're an entrepreneur that essentially said, "Okay, I want a leasing company that provides greener transport for my customers. That's create jobs for people." You guys have had obviously a successful customer base, but where do you see the job of it? And we've got the Wolfe List coming out in September. The Monday night after this, Monday the 9th of February, we've got our event in London where we've got speakers from across the energy sector saying where jobs will be. But where do you see the jobs in energy transition of transport, or specifically within your area, the leasing business? Because it sounds like there could be huge up gains. As we electrify the streets, the demand for electric vehicles could really go up. I was just wondering where you see the jobs in the leasing and the green transport world.
Yeah, it's so everything we're going through is like a second industrial revolution, isn't it? And the first industrial revolution, which is partly responsible for where we are today, but we were at the top of that. We were at the forefront of it. We spoke about Chinese product, and China were well ahead of this, which is why they're in such, along with other things we won't necessarily dwell on, but government subsidies, etc. That's why they're so far at the forefront of this, and why that BYD I drove last week. Did you get to drive a BYD, Alex?
I've not driven the Seal yet, but I have driven most of the modern Teslas, and I have done the Kia one as well. But yeah, I'm waiting to do my BYD Seal. Yeah,
I'm not a Tesla fan, like I said, but I was massively impressed with the BYD Seal when I had that. And when we went up to Newcastle, we popped into one of our customers, who's been a customer actually for 13 years. We put about 30 or so Nissan Leafs into there 13 years ago. So that was huge back in the day. For a company called Unipress, they supply to Nissan, and they're helping build the new Nissan Leaf. And all around that park, there's battery production, there's all the supply chain in the green supply, and there's huge investments just in skilling people up. Now, at Fleet Evolution, we have a very active apprenticeship program, where pretty much 75% of our staff started with us as apprentices. And one of the things we're moving into now is partnering with Manchester University to do a climate apprenticeship, which is looking at climate, looking at carbon reporting, carbon literacy, and also touching, as a level 4 apprenticeship, on all the other technologies in there, so solar and other areas, other renewables. And I really feel it's giving people just the perfect skill set for that next career step, because of course they've got two challenges, the new employees coming through. The first challenge they've got is we're going to need people that's a green skill set. The second challenge, of course, is AI. So a lot of the traditional jobs are going to be gone. We've just implemented some AI for marketing and sales, and just that's taken away ultimately a couple of people's jobs. It's not, we're just diversifying people and they're helping our growth. But it's taken away people's traditional jobs. So I think tech is going to be absolutely huge. And I really, really, really wish the government would just get behind it to a greater extent and just help us grow and prosper from this, rather than at the moment we have a government who potentially are a bit confused about it all, and then opposition that seem to just want to argue that it's all a huge waste of money when it could be such a revenue generator and position us in such a position of strength as we continue to grow.
No, and I totally agree. And I think for everyone who's interested in that Fleet Evolution apprenticeship, or if you're interested in actually sitting down with Andrew and talking about your next fleet choices, we've got a link to the website in the notes below.
Thank you.
But I just want to know a bit more about you, Andrew. I mean, because AI can do a lot, or before then, other revolutions could do a lot. But I know to get people to part with their hard-earned money, or their company's hard-earned money, or as an employee scheme, is not easy, right? I think it's the one beautiful thing in sales. And I got to say, one of the things I loved once, I went to one of the champagne vineyards, and rather having a statue to the artist that inspired the grapes, or the gardener that laid the fields, they actually had a statue to the guy who had gone to all the different markets around the world and opened up champagne sales in North Africa, Asia. And I like that, because I was like, they're actually realizing that the person who does the ABC always be closing, the person who does this. And I'm interested because 15 years ago, I'm sure you started with an Excel sheet, maybe a few good ideas, but you probably started with 0 cars, and today you're at 1,600 cars. Can you tell people how you did your deal closing? And essentially, can you tell us a bit about those first customers? You've already touched on one that went with 30 Leafs back when everyone's like, what are you doing, probably? And therefore, I'm interested how you started, because it must have been quite enticing just to go the old route, what people had always bought, and not go into the car leasing business. So how did you go from 0 to 1,600?
Well, I was firmly behind the environmental agenda, but I just wasn't clever enough to do something worthwhile. So I didn't have the intelligence to create a car or create an energy system or solve the problems around solid state batteries or things like this. So I just got into distributing a product and distributing the product in a very tax efficient way. So there was a company out in those days that was using salary sacrifice as a mechanism to push out diesels and petrols. And I just thought, well, actually, I was born and raised in just close to Birmingham, and I was an asthmatic. And quite often I'd have to go everywhere. I'd be on a rugby pitch with an inhaler down my sock, that type of thing. I moved to the countryside when I was about 30 and never had an asthma attack since. And so kind of opened up to the benefits of clean air. So I was very, very eager on electrification because of that and because of the experience. So I wanted a business where I could grow, scale, and help do some good for the planet and for the air quality we have all around us, which is why I started. The first people we spoke to were people kind of in the market, like Unipress. They were manufacturing or helping manufacture the Nissan Leaf, so it was a big driver for them. There's another company down in Milton Keynes that much smaller. They had about 3 Nissan Leafs from us and then moved into Zoe's. And for those guys, they were in manufacturing as well, a company called Secure by Design. So they were in manufacturing for cars. So initially we just targeted people who were in that particular market sector. And then as obviously 2017 came along and people started picking on diesels and looking for differences, we then got into pitching to people. We gave them technology for the cars to show them how much they were spending on petrol or diesel, and overlapping over that, how they could leverage the charging network and go electric. And looking at that, we started to put charging infrastructure in for our customers as well. Not the really expensive stuff that you were involved in, Alex, but, the cheaper kind of basic 7 kilowatt chargers, but we put them in a customer site. Or even sometimes just literally say, well, upgrade those 13-pin plugs and you can use those if you do. Like we've got a care company that's one of our customers. Moved a lot of their minibuses over to electric because they could literally just plug them in and charge them for pennies. But it was really 2020 or 2019 when the government got behind it. Once the government got behind electric cars, the supply chain was turned on then. So prior to summer 2019, I think Tesla had bought over a handful of Model 3s. Once the government said, actually, we've got 0% benefit in kind tax, then Tesla moved their supply or moved their push of supply from Norway, from the rest of Europe, back to the UK, where there's huge influxes coming in. And then other manufacturers kind of kicking and screaming a little bit with the European manufacturers, jumped onto the bandwagon and started to get behind this as well. So that was a real time for us. Like I say, we had about 300 vehicles in 2019, and we've doubled pretty much every year after that point. And well, it's January, but we've had a record month again this month. So it's looking really, really good. It just shows you the importance of government policy and how much they can shape these things. Because if they hadn't made that change in 2019, I still think we'd be just trying to push water uphill. Manufacturers bought on supply. People started taking product. That was the change. And that's what we need again now. We need the right type of government policy, not 3p per mile or little gimmicks like that. We need the right type of policy. So a real push, for example, on charging. So people like yourself, at some point, next 5 years, your council's probably going to dig up your pavement. There's no cohesive policy of when they do that, let's electrify the pavement at that point as well, which would make perfect sense. There's nobody pushing that. There's nobody owning it. They're just sitting in meeting rooms, coming up with harebrained policies, which are never going to move us forward in the way we need to.
I'm going to come back to that to end the episode today, but I just also wanted your thoughts. A few key messages that I think also to young entrepreneurs out there thinking about it. If I look at a timeline, it basically means you were really pushing from 2010 to 2019 for that eureka moment. And it was 9 years later the eureka moment happened when you had a change in policy. So I'd like all of our entrepreneurs to think about that, because I do think people are quite short on mindset in terms of like how long they think suddenly like the good days come in business. And yeah, don't get me wrong, there are examples of someone has an idea, it's on the market within the year and do great. But I think that's a really fair story, and I've seen that myself, is that you don't quite know when the eureka moment. I remember with HVO and trucks, we tried lots of different things, from more efficient diesels, AdBlue and stuff, but it was only really HVO that suddenly we had a product that would do 1 billion litres in a year. And even that was sort of 3 or 4 years of push before suddenly the market came to us. So I really like that story. One question I just want to ask before we end on what the government should do next is, you're from the Midlands, you're in the car industry, you like the green car industry. Your views on Jaguar's next stage? Because Jaguar obviously have got quite a bit of controversy in the last year, not just their factory closing down, but a pretty challenging advert. But they are going into that space where essentially the Taycan has had its own troubles, a luxury big electric car. There's been some probably good success stories like the Audi e-tron. I think it's a beautiful car, and you said you own one yourself, and lots of people find it very desirable. How do you think things look for Jaguar? Because I see that some of the development cars have been spotted out on the road. It's a long time to halt production for, and they were kind of like the early movers and then just stopped, and it was intriguing. Do you think there's good news coming to the Midlands, and that Jaguar can resurrect itself on the green revolution?
Wasn't quite prepared for this question, but I'll answer it the best I can. I'll answer it first, just with 2 examples of a personal car. So you mentioned the e-tron. This is quite a funny story I'll share. I have the e-tron SUV, the 55, the old one. And I have that because of my lifestyle. I'm not sure if you also have the e-tron GT. The e-tron GT is an amazing car. And I remembered not long after I had my car, the e-tron GT passed me on the A38. My daughters looked at it out the window and said, "Dad, why didn't you get one of those?" And I pointed behind me, because my daughters also have ponies, at the horse trailer attached to my car. And I said, that's why, I will not swear on a podcast, but that's why, expletive, I don't have one of those, because of those. A, the expense, and B, I need to tow. My before that, I had an I-Pace, and I absolutely loved the I-Pace. My co-director here has also got an I-Pace, which he's still got, which he loves. He's a real petrol head, and the I-Pace was a really good driver's car. Apart from the one time where I picked one up and then all of a sudden the brakes failed on the A14, which wasn't, and that's obviously Jaguar's biggest problem, just that reliability. They've still got an amazing brand. They've still got a brand which can excite people. Sometimes a lot of the electric car brands can seem quite bland. Some of the Chinese product can seem a little bit bland, leave people a little bit cold. Jaguar still has that ability to just excite people and elicit a response, an emotional response from when they drive that particular product. So I think providing Jaguar can solve that reliability issue and not alienate their existing customers, and they are starting to take ownership of some warranty issues on their existing customers, which is really good. I think they've got a really positive future, because just that brand is still so strong. Despite all their attempts to destroy it, it's still a very, very strong brand for them.
I'm optimistic. As a lad who's done, you can probably see with a tweed jacket, of course he drives. I haven't had a Jag for the last few years, but I've done 250,000 miles in between 2 XJs and an X. I absolutely love them. So I'm really happy to hear that you think they've got a strong future. But last question, we ask this to a lot of our guests, because as you see, sometimes we feel the government give confusing messages, not just this government, but successive governments. It's fair to say, as people know, last year I chaired the Spectator Energy Summit, where we brought together government and fuel. Guys, the tickets for 2026 are on sale now, 30th of November, and it's going to be a great event again. But on the 30th of November, and they've got a nice period of time between the start of February to the 30th of November, but over the next 12 months, What are you looking for from the government if they were to focus on really cracking and supporting the car leasing industry to go green? What would you like to see the government do in the next 12 months to help energy transition?
I think I've already gone on about it constantly, so apologies for that, Alex, but it is definitely just making that central principle of putting curbside charging key at local authority level. So I, as I said, grew up just outside Birmingham. Birmingham, I remember in 2019, I went to a conference there where they were talking about electrifying the city. And obviously in Birmingham, there's lots and lots of terraced housing, places where they can't recharge cars very easily or put charging infrastructure in easily. They're also in Birmingham digging up the whole city. They've been doing it for about the last 10 years. I don't quite know when it's going to end, but digging up the whole city. So there's quite a few cities there, cities there. There's quite a few terraced streets there where they've been completely dug up, completely replaced without a single thought of infrastructure and EV charging. So I think the key thing is EV charging. And then the second thing is just consistency on policy. You know, that 3p per mile, where did that come from? And actually, it doesn't cost that much to most drivers of electric cars, but it's just, again, giving lots and lots of information or lots and lots of ammunition to the anti-EV lobby to come out and just hit people and scare people and worry people.
Spot on. Thank you so much for the last hour, Andrew. I think for our listeners, we heard a very clear messaging to end with. 3p a mile almost feels like taxing the working. What Andrew's done today is he said that he works with companies and individuals that essentially now are 1,600 of their cars have gone to electricity. What they've seen also is that actually there's experiences from a personal one of where his beloved wife actually loves the fact that it's preheated in the morning and ready to go, through to the fact that actually now things like range have gone out the window. People argue about affordability, but certainly in the leasing and new car bracket, you can get a really good deal that includes pretty much everything for $350 a month. And if you think that the leasing company is dealing with the depreciation, not you, that's an incredible way to get motoring each month, especially if you think about the costs of public transports. I know, going into London the other day cost me 23 quid on a travel card. So actually, that's only about 14 days worth of travel on public transport in London to get the same as a whole EV vehicle to yourself. I think today we've heard about how actually the entry level careers are now going into the firms such as the likes of BYD, MG, to really make sure that they are enjoying that revolution and it's not just the company director. So it feels like we've cracked part of the nut, but we've still got 80% of the car market to go at. I can't wait for the comments this week. I know a lot of my fans are of the persuasions of the die-hard petrol head, and another side of my fans are they've got every electric type of vehicle going, and it's great to hear. But what really touched me today is that the Wolfe Power Club with the Wolfe List wants jobs in energy transition. Whereas we're doing the talking, Andrew's actually done the recruiting already and started an apprenticeship with Manchester University. For me, that gets me excited, and it's great that we could share that story today. Andrew, thank you for your time, and I hope everyone enjoyed that the man with 1,600 cars could tell you a few truths about what's going on out there.
Thank you, Alex.